If you've got big dreams and bad genes, these shirts are available at barbellapparel.com. Hit the link below. This is the pulling technique of Konstantin Konstantinovs, one of the greatest deadlifters in the history of powerlifting. He's recognizable to many for yanking incredible weights to lockout with a unique pulling style and no lifting belt. So iconic was the reign of KK that he became a meme, a legend, and an actual logo. But as with all greats in any field who have such a peculiar approach to success, the question becomes, was he good because of his methods, or was he good in spite of them? And beyond that, what can we learn about his unique hunchback-style deadlift and the training that he used to excel at it? Can we in fact harness these dark arts for good? Now, we can't start this discussion without getting into the controversy about backgrounding. The Church of Deadlifting is split into two denominations. We have Camp A, the rounders, the spinalists, people who emphasize the fact that many different techniques have proven successful, that the spine and supporting tissues can adapt to be strong in a whole bunch of positions, and people might actually be better off for it. They usually share this picture of a contortionist in a carousel reel on IG next to them doing some old-timey lift that they fetishize, like a Jefferson curl or bent press. And it's almost always with the caption that says, "Take that, glassbacks." Now, their actual belief is that there's massive societal benefit to getting anybody to deadlift, and the risk of doing it improperly is overblown. So to fixate on injury risk instead of just trying to sign up more people to deadlift is really just fear-mongering, and it creates an unnecessary barrier to getting a stronger population. I actually recognize this problem, and I'm charitable to their mission. Now, beyond that, the spinalists are generally up to date on pain science, an airtight scientific discipline if there ever was one, and they espouse the biopsychosocial model for pain, which suggests that it's an error to assume that the ripping you heard mid-deadlift was from anything that you actually needed. They also hate Stu McGill for treating back injuries like injuries. Now, of course, I'm being obtuse. I've listened to some of Stu's presentation on this general topic, and I have my issues, but I am waiting for the biopsychosocial prescription for dealing with painful swelling in other parts of the body. Like, oh, your ankle hurts to move? Have you considered the social factors influencing your experience? Now, on the other side of the field, we have Camp B. Those are people who think that a reasonably neutral spine is stronger and more injury-proof than a completely collapsed one. They recognize that backgrounding is almost always involuntary, and that involuntary positioning on any skill-based exercise is probably not ideal, especially at maximal poundages. And if you are engaged in chasing stressors beyond your current level of fitness, which is part and parcel of this little thing that we call progressive overload, you're probably likely to run into the limits of your tissue's load tolerance. Now, these are also people that think a wet pop in your back followed by extreme inflammation and pain probably means that an actual injury took place. Radical, I know. Now, while the people in this camp might err too far on the side of caution, they recognize that skill and efficiency is part of a long, successful competitive career, and you usually don't get best results by brushing off technical breakdown, or they at least recognize it doesn't work like that in literally any other sport. Lowering barriers to lifting by removing standards altogether is the lifting equivalent of, "I woke up like this." Like, no, if you want to participate at the highest levels, shower first, and put on a fucking bra. Now, looking at Konstantin, there's no doubt that he experienced the adaptations that spinalists are always going on about. According to him, he only ever hurt his back squatting, never deadlifting. But it's important to note that he has traits from the conservative side. A few things are obvious. 1, he's efficient. 2, he's deliberate. And 3, he's thoroughly adapted. It's not like, this is just how I pull, man. I'm going to make the case that these 3 things are the reason that KK was able to use this technique so successfully, and that it's actually the minimum criteria for using any technique successfully. Now, as you look through meme highlight reels of deadlift fails, understand that there's only 2 reasons that any lifter would find themselves in the famous dog taking a shit pose. Assuming that they're actually not trying to do that, it's either because their back is weak or their legs are weak. A weak back means that the torso muscles can't keep the spine in the same position as the weights get heavier, but the strong muscles of the hams and glutes just don't care. They can keep you going up anyways. This is the absolute shittiest way to deadlift. It screws with recovery, it makes you feel like crap, it makes pulling very inconsistent, and in my humble opinion, this is actually where the injuries happen. Your erectors on every rep are going through a forced negative. Imagine that for your legs every time you squatted, or for your pecs every time you benched. You would almost expect to feel beat down, inflamed, and really unenthused for the next session. Now, on the other hand, someone might have a plenty strong back, but as they strain against a max effort lift, the hams and glutes just aren't strong enough to extend the hip and move the weight vertically until they make a small little adjustment by letting their back give a little. Now suddenly the bar is closer to the hips and the new leverages make the lift doable. People in both camps do this while being entirely unaware. But if you were going to round as a deliberate strategy, it has to be for the second reason. It's to shorten the moment arm and get more out of your current hip extensor strength. Now, famous rounders include guys like Lamar Gant, Steve Johnson, Evan Carden. Now, what stands out with these lifters is there just doesn't really seem to be any attention or effort paid to what the back is doing. Like they start off in one position and the back just gives more and more and more as the weight gets heavier. They've clearly adapted to be able to handle it and they're unconcerned with the effects, but there's an obvious inefficiency here. Like when you exert effort to go up, but your back goes down, that's a loss of force transfer. That is not awesome. Now, this is where Konstantin showed that he is, in fact, a different breed. You ever find yourself confused by the complexity of programming? I know I struggled like crazy in my early strongman career. There was just too much advice, and every decision I made felt like a guess. As soon as I hit a snag in any program, I would have no idea what to do, so I would inevitably bail. It took me years of training and coaching to figure out how to predictably increase muscle and strength, both in myself and others. And those lessons took me to my own showings in World's Strongest Man, America's Strongest Man, and the Arnold in the 231-pound weight class. This is why we made Base Strength AI, to give clear, direct, and personalized instruction right in the middle of your workout in real time. Base Strength AI features 3 programs: Block, 70s Powerlifter, and Bull Mastiff, each one inspired by the work ethic and programming of the biggest and strongest bodybuilders, powerlifters, and strongmen throughout history. These templates originated in my book Base Strength, and they can be ran as is, but with Base Strength AI, weight and volume are prescribed to you on your specific feedback, and that's personalization that even an online coach can't replicate. This gives you the absolute certainty that every rep is meaningful, that every block of training is getting you closer to your goals. It's my programming, but it's your program. Get the heart of old school training with the intelligence of a coach right in your back pocket. Head now to basestrength.com. The Latvian lifter started in athletics as a teenager with gymnastics and judo, but he quickly found his talent for deadlifting. At 15 years old, he recalled weighing 70 kilograms and pulling 215 kilograms with, as he called it, a horribly rounded back and without a belt. Now, this implies that his round back then was actually much more egregious and probably not deliberate the way it is now. That I will break my back, I heard from as long as I started to deadlift, or for the last 16 years. I've always deadlifted with a rounded back. My legs have always been lagging in development, but results in deadlift have always been increasing. Now, early vids of Konstantin in 2003 show a smaller man pulling in a very reactive style. Hints of his final form are present. He's hunched over, but here he's focused on a grip and rip technique. This is the same speed-centric pulling of other rounded back pullers who favor a violently explosive start that really just isn't viable with a completely rigid spine and careful setup. In this video, he doesn't look unlike other famous rounders. But as the years would go on, KK would evolve and his numbers would climb. Here we have a much more muscular Konstantin pulling 864 in 2015. Notice the start. His upper back is packed in an extreme fashion, exaggerated by his head being in his lap, like he's in a manual describing airplane emergency procedures. And more than that, he no longer dive bombs. He squats lower, takes his time, and then pauses before the lift. Now, this is important because the pause actually loses stretch reflex, and that sacrifices the explosive yank of a grip and rip. But it does emphasize positioning. Now, this is the surest sign to me that Konstantin evolved his approach over time to emphasize position over raw aggression and speed. Now, we need to take special inventory of his lower back, which in my opinion is the most important and peculiar thing about his setup. Guys like Steve Johnson have less integrity in their midsection, and it gives them dynamite at the beginning of their pull. They can just yank the bar off the ground and get a ton of speed, especially on a whippy bar, but it trades away efficiency of the hinge, especially at lockout. Where a limp spine puts the bar closer to you at the start and then gives you a leverage advantage, it puts the bar further out from you at the last few inches of lockout. And we see this with the slow as molasses lockouts that start at around 80%. This should actually be the easiest part of the lift. Now, this is also one of the reasons why you might have heard the upper back is a potential culprit for a weak lockout, because if your upper back isn't strong enough to straighten out your spine as you stand up, that means that your lockout is going to be haunted by a flopped over position that puts the bar unnecessarily far in front of you. Now, Konstantinovs contrasts with someone like Steve Johnson because he has an extreme round in his upper back beyond what Johnson actually has, but he also holds an almost atypically neutral position in his lumbar spine. The effect of pairing these two positions is the huge advantage of a shortened spine at the very start of the lift, but with the benefit of preserving deadly lockout strength at the top. Where others would have to strain to lock out their floppy spines, Konstantin had a neutral base and a strong upper back that could straighten out the spine as he cleared the knees and reclaim a leverage advantage for an efficient hinge and smooth lockout. He was never not in his most strongest position. This is as hybrid as it gets. Here, he looks like a typical lanky, high-hipped, grip and rip deadlifter, all hip power and good leverages. But here, he looks like a Chad Smith or Curch using an incredibly low hip position to get a ton of leg drive, more than any long limb puller usually bothers with. The mix resulted in some of the most disgusting feats of deadlift strength that powerlifting has ever seen. Now, the workouts that supported this technique went as follows. He would train 4 days per week, whole body, doing squats and bench presses on all 4 days, and focusing specifically on deadlifts on 2 of them. On his heavy deadlift day, he would start with rack pulls, always changing the height position, and he would go up to a top 3 or an AMRAP set, depending on how he would feel, and then he would go to bench press before returning to the deadlift, now from a lower position, either the floor or a deficit, and hitting another top 2 to 3 reps. He would then finish up with heavy box squats, yes again hitting a top 2 to 3 reps. According to the man, in deadlift, I max out only in competitions or on special occasions. The heavy deadlift workout, together with a heavy box squat, takes about 4 hours, and after such training, the body recovers much more slowly. All in all, a heavy deadlift workout is done once in 13 to 14 days. His second day was a recovery/auxiliary day. He would start with light squats and light bench presses, but then would do speed deadlifts for 8 singles against bands, followed by the lion's share of his back and ab accessory work that was so important to maintaining his position in a deadlift. His staples were explosive pull-ups with weight, glute ham raises, hyperextensions, and very heavy ab work, the most recognizable of which are the insanely heavy standing abdominal work he would do with a rope. As Konstantin himself said, you have to remember that this style puts twice as big a demand on my spinal erectors, upper back, and abdominals. All must be very strong. Now this brings us to the question, should you do it? As with all technical changes, you have to weigh the potential advantages with the complications. It's good to experiment, but many lifters screw themselves up by constantly sidelining their training to experiment with different techniques. Every time you incorporate something new, you are revisiting the learning curve, which means you are not maximally increasing muscular size or strength. So if you don't have problems with posture, or if you feel pretty strong at the start of your deadlift, there's less reason to go out of your way to try to lift like Konstantin. A lot of you short torso, long arm guys that can grip and rip with high hips, you're probably in this camp already. Now, if you're like me and you have a dachshund build, your short arms and longer torso might make your start position a nightmare. Deadlifts might just tax the ever-loving shit out of you, and maybe you're prone to an achy back from years of forced director negatives on anything over 85%. Part of unfucking my deadlift, but also repairing the decade of chronic low back injuries I had, meant giving into the round, actually allowing my back to round, but in a deliberate fashion, not because it just ended up that way from lack of strength. And that led to me focusing on actual abdominal strength, focusing on intra-abdominal pressure, learning how to brace, and maintaining that specific position at all costs. Now, the result of this was growing a massive hump of erector meat on the middle of my back that is probably one of the most visible features on my body. Thankfully, that helps immensely on strongman movements, where most of the events involve wrapping around an awkward object and uncoiling my spine like some giant cobra. I hate to try to make the argument from functionality, but a rounded back lift is the quickest way to strong, thick spinal erectors. Now, as I continue into the future, it's become obvious as I get heavier that KK was absolutely right. I myself have had to incorporate a lot more abdominal work and reprioritize upper back barbell work, which has always been a staple, but it's something that strongman events would typically edge out in my training. Now it's not optional. I need to hammer my upper back and abs if I want to be rigid, strong, and safe in this position. So my recommendation to anybody who's considering overhauling overhauling their lift is to not just ditch your current setup. Learn to experiment by small changes so that a bad result doesn't cost you all the time you invested. It's really easy to just keep the position you're comfortable with as a main lift and include the technique you're considering as a secondary movement to practice afterwards, or you can do it on another day. And that's one of the benefits of using a lot of variation similar to your main movement as part of your regular training. You get more general muscular development, less weaknesses, more well-rounded strength, but you also have no doubt as to where you're actually the strongest or most advantaged, and transitioning to those positions becomes much, much easier. So hopefully this provided some insight into the pulling mechanics of one of the most well-known legendary deadlifters in the history of strength sports. Unfortunately, Konstantinovs passed away in 2018 at the young age of 40. In line with the mythos of Konstantin, rumors abounded that he was involved in a 45-minute knife fight with multiple people, and that is what claimed his life. Other people have dispelled that as nonsense and said that he died simply from heart failure, probably from years of gear use. My favorite ending comes from Rorschach's bloat in the Bromley HQ Discord. He died pulling 550 kilograms raw while draining blood and reciting poetry. End of story. That, I think, is the just ending for Konstantin that we all envision. So let me know what you guys think. I compiled a few of his different training outlines from various interviews into a PDF. You guys can get that by hitting the link below. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Until next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.